topic this week is individual differences. So exploring how people's personalities or other characteristics may affect their language learning processes. So there's multiple topics that this chapter addresses, and some of them are related, some of them are not. So the first is intelligence. So they're sort of exploring, is IQ linked to language learning? And, what is intelligence? We have studied about multiple intelligences. Most of us know about, kinesthetic intelligence or auditory versus visual. So does one of those types of intelligence have a stronger association with language learning? The chapter also brings up a very important concept from Cummins, which is the difference between BICS and CAP. You will often hear the abbreviations referred to in that way, BICS and CAP. So BICS refers to basic interpersonal communicative skills, and CAP refers to cognitive academic language proficiency. So they kind of suggest that intelligence more strongly affects the CALP, the cognitive academic language proficiency. So BICS usually refers to kind of conversational English, someone who can say like, hey, how are you? What's going on? Maybe a student who you've seen who can really interact with their peers effectively in English. Even might seem to know a lot of slang or seem very natural. But there might be a difference between that and their ability to write in English or to produce accurate sentences, to have a varied vocabulary. So there's not a definite or conclusive answer about whether intelligence affects language learning. And it's also very hard to tease out whether intelligence affects someone's performance on a test as opposed to their kind of core acquired language abilities. Is it reflecting test-taking skills in general, or is it really reflecting their language abilities? Very closely connected is this idea of aptitude. In terms of, in our book, they point out that aptitude, or the underlying ability that someone has to learn a language, might be connected to working memory, how much someone can remember on a day-to-day basis, and specifically phonological working memory or phonological memory, how much sort of by hearing and reproducing in speech someone can remember. So I linked, and I would recommend this video, Teen Speaks Over 20 Languages. You can see it's a little older, 12 years old. But I know there are a lot of videos on TikTok or other platforms now that show people who speak a lot of different languages and are multilingual. I really do like this video, though, because I think it shows that this hyper-polyglot, a person who is a polyglot, many languages, hyper-polyglot, like really a lot of languages, Tim Donor, that this guy has some sort of perhaps aptitude or underlying ability. But what I like in this video is you can also see him working really hard and really caring a lot to learn the languages that he's learning. And when I've shown this video to my ESL students and they speak some of those languages, they're pretty impressed with his ability to produce them. So overall, just kind of consider, what is also the connection between our feelings and language learning? How we feel in the classroom, or how we feel about the language. That's also an individual difference. And I want to share an experience from my own language learning that has always stayed with me, and that I consider very important in dealing with this topic. In high school, I had a Spanish teacher who liked us to insult each other. So you would learn a phrase like ugly, fat, stupid, some sort of adjectives for describing people. And you were supposed to describe your other classmate using that vocabulary. I just remember, like, you were supposed to say, Tony is fat or something. Now, the teacher, for whatever reason, thought this was hilarious, okay? And many students thought this was hilarious. I did not think that was hilarious, okay? That was not how I had been raised or thought was, entertaining to insult people like that. So every time I would just be so stressed and so mortified that I would be called on to do some language action like that. I really feel that it impeded or blocked my language learning. Like, I really feel that I was not able to learn Spanish as effectively in high school because of that experience. And when I went to college, still a classroom setting, I felt that I was able to absorb so much more language because I didn't have that stress. Okay, so the term that we use in second language acquisition is affective factors, or you might remember from our chapter on theory with Krashen, the affective filter, something blocking us. And it's related, of course, to social emotional learning, SEL, but that's not language specific, okay? So some of the other concepts that connect to that affective filter would be motivation. So, of course, we've studied before that motivation could be intrinsic motivation or extrinsic motivation. So that the concept is that sometimes learners are motivated by their grades, by praise, by something like the ability to get a different job, for example, if learning another language. And sometimes motivation is intrinsic, such as interest or curiosity. So how does that affect our language learning differently? Another question, which is addressed very comprehensively, I would say, in the text is, to what extent do teacher actions and teacher design enhance students' motivation? Okay, looking at different types of personality is also very important when analyzing affective factors and individual differences. So an example would be the introverted or extroverted distinction, right? Is it easier for someone to learn a language if they are more social, if they get more energy from talking to others? Or is it easier for someone to learn a language if they are quieter and more self-focused? A lot of people tend to think that extroverted people learn languages more easily just because of perhaps more willingness on their behalf to communicate, but this is not always necessarily true, as introverted students, just like introverted teachers, bring their own set of strengths to the learning process. I also wanted to mention a few other important factors that I feel were not as addressed in our textbook. The first one is ambiguity tolerance. So ambiguity means when something is ambiguous, not clear or not black and white, doesn't have a clear answer to it. So there's a lot of evidence that people who have more tolerance, more acceptance of ambiguity are better language learners. Okay, so this is proven by some research that shows that when people are willing to tolerate differences and willing to tolerate unclear situations, they're able to learn language more quickly. And this reminds me of my daughter when she began studying Spanish. And, Spanish, as we know, has the adjectives after the noun. So we have like el carro azul, the blue car, instead of we have the car blue in Spanish. And that just drove her crazy. She just couldn't believe that another language would have some sort of different word order like that. She did not have very good ambiguity tolerance. She wasn't able to sort of accept those differences or those unclear situations. And I feel that it definitely did block her from effective learning. A lot of people also study the concept of risk-taking and second language acquisition. So if people are more willing to take risks, is it easier for them to learn a language? And specifically, this could relate to production of the language. The concept of anxiety is studied frequently in second language acquisition. So it's important to differentiate between different types of anxiety. So of course we have clinical anxiety. So that would be a diagnosis that's, a psychological diagnosis that's given. And that's something that affects people in multiple contexts. But in terms of language anxiety specifically, that probably would not be a diagnosis or a clinical situation. But it could have different components, such as communication, anxiety about communication, anxiety about being perceived or being evaluated negatively by others. And then many people have test anxiety, not just for language, but for other tests. But test anxiety can be very related to language anxiety and can make it harder, again, not only to acquire language, but to test or to show your knowledge of a language on a test. It's interesting to note that there is a difference between debilitative anxiety and facilitative anxiety. So some sort of anxiety, some level of anxiety may be normal in language learning, and that would be considered facilitative, that it sort of creates a little bit of edge or pressure on people that pushes them to learn more or to try to acquire more, as opposed to debilitative, which would sort of block someone's acquisition of a language. So since some of these concepts were not in the textbook as much, I would encourage you to do more research on them if this is an interesting topic for you, and perhaps do your research spotlight on them. And if you need assistance in finding an article, I would be happy to provide that. Finally, I want to mention the importance of cultural differences, which are very related to individual differences, and how cultural differences might also affect second language acquisition. So this slide presents the iceberg concept of culture, which suggests that that there is both surface level culture and deep culture. So surface level culture would be the part of the iceberg that's above the sea level, and deep culture would be the things that are below the surface of the water, which could include unspoken rules or unconscious rules, about a culture that even though we cannot see them or perceive them very easily, they have a very strong effect on us and can even be in a Titanic kind of way, right? So, as some of the examples, surface level culture could include food, dress, music, even language, celebrations, and games. But some of the aspects of culture that are deeper could include facial expressions or eye contact. Those are areas where we might perceive some individual differences that are really based on culture, So some of these areas might also affect someone's ability to learn a language or a teacher's perception of someone's ability to learn a language, if that makes sense. So it's really important to keep those cultural differences in mind in our classrooms also. And again, I encourage you to explore these topics if they are of interest to you in your final research spotlight and as well as in your final reflections for this class. Thank you.